What's up? You already know Queens College and all of my YouTube and all of my viewers out there. I hope everyone's doing great today. I go by the name of Jeff Dess, and we are back for yet another week of doing great work as Queens College continues to celebrate their Black History Month programming. When we start thinking about celebrating Black influence, we have to talk about all of the beautiful things from the art to the music, to the culture, but we also have to make sure that we're having some important conversations as well. And the conversations that we should be looking to have that aren't always going to be the easy ones. Conversations that are going to make sure that not only are we taking care of ourselves, but we're helping our communities to as well. And today is one of those conversations. We're going to be talking about self-care in the Black community, mental health in the Black community, so that we can make sure that moving forward, that we're there for one another and there for ourselves. Again, I go by the name of Jeff Dess. On behalf of Trill or Not Trill, I'm excited about today's conversation. Tonight, we have the Associate Clinical Director at the FDNY, as well as a psychologist at BNC, Dr. Nancy Adegoke. She does amazing work with the Behavioral and Neuropsychological Consultants Group, as well as the FDNY, in making sure that communities of all kinds are having conversations and are doing the work that needs to happen. So I'm just going to cut right to the chase and bring her to the stage. My friends, if you're watching out there, give us a virtual round of applause and let's bring in Dr. Nancy Adegoke. Dr. Adegoke, what's up? How are you today, Nancy?
I am well. I am well. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for allowing me to be part of the Queens College community. I am excited to be here and looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, and I got to say, you're a Queens native as well, right? So
I
we
am.
got to
I am. I
got
am
to
a
shout
Queens
that out.
native, Jamaica Queens, Jamaica Queens. And let me just say this, not only Jamaica Queens, but Springfield, St. Albans, Queens Village. Our family moved around a lot. So I am a Queens native and very familiar with Queens. And let me just say this, even familiar with Forest Hills. I lived there too. So I love Queens. So let me just shout out to Queens.
That's it. South Jamaica, Central Jamaica, South Queens,
Everywhere.
all Queens. We've
That's right.
seen it all. I love it. I love it. So Nancy, we're gonna go right into this conversation because it's an important one. And I think sometimes it's a conversation that's left in the back burner, conversation
Mm.
that's not brought to the forefront. When we start talking about mental health in the Black community, that's a phrase that we've recently seen thrown out there a lot, right? We've seen a lot of people say mental health in the Black community. That's what we're going to be talking about and discussing. Can you talk to us and just get into it about what does that even mean, right? When we start to talk about mental health in the Black community, can you talk to me about why that phrase is a phrase of importance?
It's a phrase of importance because so often and so for so many years, the Black community has not actually prioritized mental health. So this is really a conversation that needs to be in the forefront in terms of the Black community understanding and really prioritizing mental health, because it's an issue that oftentimes kind of gets put in the back burner in our community. And I think what we're seeing more recently is that mental health is an issue that affects all groups, right? And I think this is really an issue that we need to have a conversation about. I think what's also important, what we're seeing too in recent media, let's talk a little bit about some of these influence media stars who have also kind of talked about the importance of, mental health. We know Simone Biles, who is an Olympian, who talked and advocated for the importance of mental health in terms of even delaying her performances because she needed to take some time in terms of focusing on her mental health. Chelsea Price, who the former and unfortunate young woman who was Miss America, who passed away due to, basically dying by suicide. And that also kind of, I think, is a really important issue, because here we see a successful woman who seems to have it all and was battling secretly, we did not know, in terms of having depression. Kanye West, we're seeing mental health issues really kind of coming on in terms of the importance of, one, seeing how people sort of, one, deal with mental health issues how they vocalize it, how it's secret. So one of the things that I think that's really important in terms of some of these, individuals who I just kind of pointed out is that we need to take the time and have a conversation about mental health and really put it in the forefront for all generations. So from young to old, this conversation is going to incorporate the importance of mental health for all generations of people of color.
I love that you said that, when we start discussing all generations, because, we have all generations that are watching this, but, it's a conversation that sometimes has been stigmatized in the past, where either A, it's the conversation that's not happening in Black communities, or it's a conversation that is too early to breach that conversation with a child of a certain age. Or it's a conversation that, people have been living with mental health issues for 40, 50, 60 years, and it never gets addressed because of culture and things of that nature. Now, can you talk, because I know we've had this conversation about some of the stigmas around mental health in the Black community from like a historical perspective, to also some of the nuanced conversations that are happening now? Because I know this isn't just something that happened yesterday.
So, interesting. I'm going to kind of go back historically to talk about mental health in terms of the Black community. So during the time of slavery, actually, it was interesting to know that, white communities felt that Black people weren't savvy enough to actually experience or have mental health issues. So in terms of depression, anxiety, it was more seen as an issue within more so the Caucasian community experiencing, not people who, in terms of Black individuals who were slaves, to really understand what mental health issues were. So we're already starting with sort of this precipitant of mental health is not important for Black people. Black people don't experience mental health issues. So this is already sort of the precedence that we're seeing historically, right? So now, like generationally, as we continue to look at mental health issues, what we kind of see too is that our community actually takes that in as well, in terms of feeling like, what, we don't have mental health issues. We are resilient people. We fight through, which is true. However, it is so important to kind of recognize that despite the resiliency and the strength within our community, there are challenges that affect our mental health. And we need to actually recognize that we are not immune to having mental health issues. And so important to be able to say, and this is, I think, another issue within our community, to acknowledge that mental health issues happen. So yeah, it's okay to say, I experience depression, I have anxiety, to be able to verbalize and communicate that. So the other thing that we also notice too, so when we talk about the Black diaspora, it is actually pervasive in terms of the Black community not recognizing mental health issues. So the Caribbean community, the African community, the Black American community, all view mental health as sometimes very stigmatizing. I think it is changing, but for generationally, it has been viewed as a weakness. If you have a mental health issue, it is seen as though this person cannot kind of deal with their own problems. They need to seek some sort of outside help. And that is typically not viewed as acceptable. It's typically seen as, within our community, as dealing with your own issues on your own, or seeking spirituality, seeking the church or the church community to kind of work through some of those challenges, which can be a support as well. But what I'm kind of emphasizing is the importance of also seeking the expert professional mental health expert to help in terms of addressing mental health issues.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really, you brought up a lot of really good points there. And I think historically, if you're tough, then that's how you beat depression, right? If you're smart enough, that's how you can overcome anxiety. And I think like those messages have been, put forth so often that people try to fight these things on their own when they need experts.
Absolutely.
I'll talk about it from my own perspective, is that, I for years you don't even know that people are experts, right? You don't know that experts exist. It's like there's psychiatrists are for people who need medicine, and there's all of these things that get pushed forward. So, I want to know from you your thoughts on like access, right?
Mm,
So what about
mm.
that? Like, can we talk a little bit about, because I have some questions that, there's a lot of, but what about the access, right? Understanding
Hmm.
that there are psychologists and psychiatrists and counselors and folks that can actually help you out. Like, can you talk a little bit about in the Black community, particularly the
Hmm.
access and the issues, if there are any, with access to mental health professionals?
Sure. So I'm going to differentiate a little bit. So in terms of the college student population, I think what's great in terms of for students that there is a mental health center clinic that is accessible, right? So that is just makes it just easy and seamless in terms of accessing services. So for college students, if at any point in time you're feeling overwhelmed, anxious, depressed, debilitated by mental health issues right on your campus. And let me say this, I used to work in a college campus as well as a director of counseling services. So it does make it easier in terms of for college students. Now, in terms of the Black community as a whole, some of the issues and challenges challenges exist because of insurance. So looking at sort of access requires an individual to be able to access services by having health insurance, right? And some that can be a barrier. So not everyone has health insurance. We know this has been a battle in terms of creating access for, citizens of the United States, and it continues to be an issue in terms of health and access, health issues and access for all. So that can create a real challenge. I'll say this too, given the pandemic right now, access has become even more so challenging in terms of finding a mental health professional. So, um, we have been all through it for the past 2 years and continue to be, overwhelmed, challenged, adjusting to this new norm, right, in terms of living through a pandemic. And people are actually now and have been seeking services. So, another challenge that is sort of current is being able to find a provider. And what I find personally is that individuals of color tend to want to find a professional of color. So that is even more so challenging. So in terms of, being a psychologist, um, the I would say in terms of psychologists of color, particularly being of African descent, it is such a small number. So 4% of us are psychologists in the United States, and
Wow.
so it's really challenging in terms of finding mental health services, is particularly for a provider of color. What is also happening too is that there's others mental health professionals. So we do have in New York, we have licensed mental health counselors. We also have social workers who provide services. So that helps a little bit in terms of alleviating different sort of mental health experts. So if you're not able to find a psychologist, you can also look for other mental health providers in other disciplines, which can be helpful, but again, very challenging as I speak to other mental health providers in other disciplines. It's just really challenging. Everybody's seeking services. But I also want to let individuals know if you can't find someone who is of your background, so if you're looking for a Black mental health experts, there are, I would say mental health experts who are also culturally competent. So you can also find a therapist who can be culturally sensitive, who can also help you in terms of overcoming certain issues and may not be of your background. So that's also something I want to put out there too, given the shortage, the difficulty in terms of accessing services.
So, you bring up 2 points. And I want to say before I ask my next question and thoughts, please, if you're watching out there live on Facebook and or YouTube, please share your questions in the comment section so that if we have any of those, we can reach out and get them to Dr. Nancy Adegoke. Now, there were two things, and I want to make sure that I cover both. Number one is the preference, right? So identifying the like your preference, like how do I know? And I don't know if this question is right for now. Sure, no worries. And I don't know if this question is right for now, but just thinking about like finding a person who is best for me. So if I'm a student out there, and I have the opportunity to find somebody, like, how do I go about finding a person that fits what I need? Is there a thing that I should be looking for?
Uh, excuse me.
Sure.
So I would say, in terms of fit, I'm sorry, my voice is a little off. Let
Yeah. Did you want to grab some water or?
me just grab some water. I'll be right back.
Yeah, sure. So, as Dr. Nancy goes and grabs some water, we want to continue to let you all know that the question and answer comment section is open and available, because we want to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. I think one of the things when it comes to self care, and we're going to ask Nancy some of those questions a little bit later, is, what are you doing out there to assure that you are in your best and self, because there's a lot of things that are happening right now. As college students, you have to think about midterms are probably coming up soon. You're dealing with things, whether it's tuition issues, financial issues, family issues, and what are we making sure that we're doing? And something that Nancy had brought up earlier also was the conversation, about some of the pressures, right? Some of this stuff is historical. So we start to think about, um, that historical context. Are we taking care of ourselves historically? So, I mean, it's deep in its context. I think it's important, and we're gonna get Nancy back on in a second. But
There we go.
that's the
Sorry about
key.
that.
Welcome back, Nancy. We're glad to have you.
Thank you. Thank
All
you.
right, it's all good. But yeah,
Yes.
so the question I wanted to ask was like finding the counselor or finding the psychologist or finding the person that's best for me. How do I know? Is there a way? Is it a feeling? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So, oftentimes people really look at what you can do is look at people's bio. So you can kind of see if that person connects with basically their experience. Does it connect with you? So is it someone who works with college students? Is it someone who specializes in depression and anxiety? Is it someone who uses the cognitive behavioral approach? I feel like that's the approach you want to use. Is it someone who has sort of a specialty? So those are the things that people look at. So sometimes it's about gender, it's about age, it's about sexual orientation, it's about experience. So people feel what that connection is, and by reading sometimes the bio of the provider. Some mental health experts also, in terms of professionals, do provide consultation. So you can have an opportunity to talk to the person and say, let me see if this kind of fits. Do I feel comfortable with this person? Is this possibly a good match? So you do have an opportunity to kind of see whether it's a good match. And sometimes it actually takes a few sessions to kind of see if there's a connection. And some people connect and that works. And then let me also say this. I say this to my clients that, if you don't find a connection, if we're not connecting, it's okay. Let me know, maybe I can even help you find someone who you might feel a little bit more connected with. So it really is important about that fit, because you want to be able to feel comfortable in that room, to feel honest, to feel transparent, to really address those issues that you're coming in to work through. And if you don't feel that comfort level, if you don't feel confident or feel like this person has the expertise, or you don't feel comfortable, it really is important to kind of find another provider. So the fit is really important, and that allows for engagement, rapport, and trust.
Yeah, it's like don't you're not hurting your therapist or your counselor's
You're not.
feelings.
No.
No,
No. And let me say this, every therapist wants the client to be in that seat and feel comfortable in terms of addressing that issue. And if you don't, I mean, it's not beneficial for you. It's not beneficial for the person who's sitting across from you, who's supposed to help you out.
Yeah, yeah. Now that's real. Because I think that's sometimes the thing too, right? Is that people feel like I don't want to be. I'm just gonna hide. Like I think that the counselor or the therapist is the time to be open and honest as possible. This is not the time to say, "Oh
Absolutely.
man, I don't want to. I'm not really digging this person, but I'm gonna come back for another 3 sessions."
Yeah.
It's just not beneficial. Um, so Nancy, you talked about history a little bit. You touched on that, and
Mhm.
I want to ask the question
Mhm.
about I'm gonna throw it out there. Racism, right? Racism
Mhm.
has a deep embedded history here in the United States and
Mhm.
worldwide. But
Mhm.
is racism causing? I mean, I know the answer. I think we all know the answer, but I want
Mhm.
to maybe get some nuanced points from you about
Hmm.
the impact of racism on, the Black community's mental health and self-care.
Absolutely. So, it's so important to examine racism because racism plays a role in terms of one's psychological well-being. So, studies have indicated that racism plays a role in terms of people of color, particularly Black Americans or those of the Black diaspora who live in this country, in terms of life satisfaction and happiness. So think about this in terms of racism. It is a system that continues to play a role in our society, and this categorization that leads to disempowerment, differences in terms of opportunities, plays a role. So think about where people live, how people work, sort of social engagements. There's all these areas that we have to sort of engage in where racism plays a role in terms of how we experience those spaces. So important to kind of acknowledge that in terms of how it impacts one's mental health. So and so this is the other thing I think I want to add too. So in terms of finding a therapist, you do want to be able to find a therapist where you can talk about that stuff. Like, you know what, this is the
Hmm.
experience that I'm having. This is what it feels like in some of these spaces. So important to find a therapist who is culturally competent and sensitive to understanding those dynamics, because these issues are real and people want to be able to have a space when they can talk about it very honestly and transparently in terms of how it affects their mental well-being.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I love about counselors and therapists and mental health professionals is that I think it's so far and few in between that you get to have honest, transparent conversations that are also like helpful for your mental well-being about racism and
Mm.
about a lot of the issues that are happening. You might be able to have that conversation with some family or friends, but for the most part, you're either, I feel, holding it back because you want to societally be a part of the larger conversation without being
Mhm.
combative. And then
Mhm.
also, I think it comes from a space of like, if you're talking to your wife or you're talking to your partner or you're talking to your best friend, it's also like we're both mad. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
If they're both from marginalized groups, right? And
Right,
so,
right.
we start, you and I have had those conversations about colonization in the past, and if you're talking to somebody else who's also from a marginalized group, we're both just like, man, this is whack. And then you
Mhm.
don't really get to
Mhm.
have that experience of letting go all the time without
Mhm.
having to feel like you're in this fight. And I think that's why it's important. Again, I'm going to continue to stress why it's important to be in those spaces because you know it's tough to be angry all the time
Yeah,
if you are.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think this is one of those issues that I think for us Black people we have to kind of address is, right, how do we work through that anger, because this is the society we live in. And so a lot of the work that I focus on, and I know probably Jeff you're going to get through this, is really talking about self-care. So
Yeah.
self-care is so important given some of the challenges that we face in the society in terms of racism, in terms of feeling disempowered, in terms of feeling excluded. So important, and I think we'll get into that conversation. But I want you, I guess, I don't know if you have questions, I can get there, but I definitely want to kind of emphasize the importance of self-care given some of the challenges we face in society, and even more so, after George Floyd incident, so much more important for us to really kind of think about self-care, because we have been bombarded by just the media in terms of these crimes against Black people, in terms of what we've been seeing. And whether you fall one way or the other politically about it, it does impact you seeing these situations where people are killed or hurt. Um, and oftentimes you even question, the legal system is in terms of the implication of some of the people who are involved in these sort of issues, right? So important in terms of self-care, given some of the dynamics that we're experiencing currently in our society.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. We're definitely good. It's kind of like it's a great segue because that's really the next half of the conversation. The first half, I really wanted to talk about that. I'm really happy and thankful that you did, about really building the framework of understanding this is kind of where we are, why we're suffering in particular issues, why the conversations are or are not happening, where to go for help. And then the next piece, I think, as you touched upon, is self-care. There's this scene in the first Avengers movie I quote very often,
Mm,
where Bruce Banner, who plays the Incredible Hulk, one of the characters, I think Captain America, asks Bruce Banner, he says, it's time to get angry. We need the Incredible Hulk. And Bruce Banner says, the secret, Captain America, is that I'm always angry. Right.
mm,
So and I never forget that line, because I think there's so many people in various communities that are always angry. Right.
mm,
But they're hiding it. They're always, the Incredible Hulk is always in there, but they're masking it as Bruce Banner, putting the glasses on, going to work, angry at a coworker, angry about racism, angry about George Floyd, angry about the pandemic, and are not letting any of it out until
mm,
it's too late, right? And it's like, now it's time that the Incredible Hulk comes out. When the Hulk comes out, buildings break and things get get destroyed. So I think, like, self-care to me is getting to the point of not always being angry inside, and kind of feeding some
mhm.
of those, that feeding yourself. So I don't want to define self-care. I know it has multiple definitions, because when you think of self-care, like, what do you mean by that?
So I think one of the things that I think about in terms of self-care is, how do you prioritize your well-being? How do I put myself first and make sure that I'm okay? I'm okay to go out to work. I'm okay to be around my partner, my spouse. I'm okay to be with my kids. I'm okay feeling by myself. I'm in a good place. I feel good, right? And so self-care means, like, to be aware of those moments too, when, you know what, I'm not feeling that great, right? Maybe, you know what, I am feeling a little overwhelmed today and I need to do something about that. I'm actually feeling sad and I need to kind of address that. I'm feeling these body aches, and maybe I need to kind of take care of that too, right? So it really is this awareness of not only your mental, but also your physical well-being, to be in that place that allows you the strength and the fortitude to go out day to day, right? So in terms of self-care, one of the things that I like to emphasize, particularly in communities of color, is to find joy. I think you talk about anger, and I think that's also something that stereotypically is associated with the Black community. And I kind of challenge that. I kind of ask clients to let's kind of redirect. They would definitely acknowledge and validate that anger, but let's look at joy. Talk to me about what makes you happy. What makes that, that smile come out for you. Talk about those spaces that you feel supported. Like, you go there, these people have your back. They are down for you. They are lifting you up. Go to find your tribe. Where is my tribe? Because I know when I go to my tribe, I am lifted. I am empowered, right? And self-care also, involves, taking care of yourself in a way that's so important. So our community is impacted so much with various illnesses, so diabetes, hypertension. So self-care also means thinking about making those dietary choices that are healthy, taking time to, exercise, go for that walk 30 minutes. Weather's starting to get better. So, take a moment outside, breathe, and to kind of like appreciate. Like, I did that today, actually. I was like, oh my God, the sun is out. I am going to just enjoy this 30 minutes of, like, sun is out, the weather's great, and appreciate my space, my environment. So, and that also includes mindfulness. So what I just kind of shared for you is kind of just being aware of my space and environment, and kind of thinking, like, let me be present. Let me just enjoy this space. Let me enjoy this weather. Let me enjoy the sunshine. Let it, like, hit on me and feel the warmth of it. So those are just some things that are really important in terms of self-care, because what we find in our communities, oftentimes we don't have time to do the self-care. So sometimes we don't go do the massages, because, you know what, we prioritize other things, like, got to do that work assignment, got to do that school assignment, got to take care of this and take care of that. And, in our community, we are really caretakers, right? So what I'm kind of saying is, like, okay, we take care of a lot of things, but now it's time to take care of you. So start kind of looking inward and seeing what are those things that you need to fulfill you and make you feel good so that you can kind of balance and actually just make it through the day, right? And so that is important. So I actually have my clients do on their schedule. I'm like, okay, let's kind of schedule some self care. Let's even try 2 to 3 days a week. I know that might be a lot, but just 2 to 3 days. The other part of self care too is also unplugging from social media. I know people have a hard time with that one. So just asking people to kind of unconnect, disconnect actually is the word I'm looking for. Disconnect, unplug, maybe once or twice a week and kind of work it up. Because sometimes we need to give our brain, our minds a break. And sometimes social media and that sort of bombardment of constant information, because that it just never stops, is also a way of self-care. Self-care is also important in terms of, for people, is to be able to look at your limitations and say, you know what, I've reached my limit. I can't take anymore. I can't do anymore. I'm not going to take on any more projects. I'm not going to be able to do this. And that's also self-care. So setting boundaries and saying no, no matter how hard that can be, is also part of self-care. So all of these things in terms of what I've suggested are just ways that it helps you feel more grounded. It's so important for us to be grounded as we go through our days.
All right. Listen, that was really good. I felt that was you describing self care was like self care in of itself. I felt better just thinking about the sun and all. That was awesome. I really appreciate you sharing that. But I have some questions, right? Because it feels like self care should be easy, but I just and you talked about that. It's like hard sometimes
Mm-hmm.
to find the time. So I know that students are and our viewers, not just students, people in general, it's just really hard to find time to say, I want to meditate, or I want to take care of myself, or I want to be grounded. Like, can you do you have a tip or suggestions on like how do I make it, how do I use my time a little bit more, usefully so that I
Yes.
can take care of myself?
Yeah. So it has to be purposeful, effortful to do this, right? So I tell, folks, like, if you find, 20 minutes to do TikTok or Instagram, you will find time to do self-care, right? So there is time in your schedule that you have to make. It's really kind of thinking about how to reshift your time, right? And so I encourage people to start off like 2 to 3 times a week. You might not be able to do the 3 times a week, but let's try for two. But trying to take steps slowly to incorporate self care. And let me just say this. I think, oftentimes when people do incorporate even one self care activity, they do notice, like, okay, I do feel better. You know what? I went to the gym, I worked out for an hour, I feel good. So sometimes that sort of positive feeling can also encourage continual self-care. So it's just about like actually getting there. But it is purposeful. And what I actually do is I have people schedule. Either you write it down on your schedule, put it on your phone. You are designating a specific time to kind of incorporate your self-care, because it does get challenging in terms of all the responsibilities that one has. But it has to be kind of seen as, this is really important for my well-being. So if I want to take care of myself, if I find myself as important and I want to prioritize my well-being, my happiness, this is something that I have to do. So kind of engaging in a conversation that encourages that, and then actually taking the actions to actually implement it. And so it does take time. Let me just say, this is not easy. Some people sometimes find it easier than others, but it takes time in terms of incorporating. So just start, I would say start once or twice a week and then build up.
Yeah, that's really good. I think, another thing that's really fun is that, I think self-care comes in multiple ways, as you said. And for me, I'm just going to share my quick self-care moment here. There's a TV show called Bar Rescue. It's not a great show, I'll be honest with you, but it's about a guy who tries to rescue these bars, and I love it. I don't have to think about the show. I'm not emotionally invested. It's something that, while I want to turn off sometimes, as you're always on, you're always on. Sometimes for me, turning off and just watching that show and having fun with it
Mhm.
is perfect, right? Sometimes it's watching Married at First Sight or Love is Blind, like these TV shows that don't really mean anything to me, and they don't bring me any unnecessary stress. It's just like, for this next hour, I'm on my couch, I'm relaxed, I'm with my wife, or I'm just chilling and I'm just watching these TV shows and just saying, all right, I'm fine here, even if it's like background noise as I'm about to take a nap or something. And I love that you mentioned all those different pieces of self-care, because sometimes I think people think that all self-care is like hiking or meditation, or but sometimes it's just like, I'm just shutting things down for a little bit and
Absolutely.
take care of me.
And it's interesting. I had a client, her self-care was like, actually, which was so I thought was like, wow, this is actually cool too. Her self-care was greasing her scalp. Like, you know what? She takes her time to just grease. And I was like, you know what? You are taking care of your hair. You are taking that time to just focus on one thing and you feel good about it. And so I think self-care can look sort of different in sort of multiple ways. So if it's something that you feel like, okay, I'm designating this specific time to take care of myself, whichever way that may be, so important to kind of engage. And it can look, like you said, I think in various ways that you may not even expect. So when I think my client told me, like, you know what, greasing my scalp makes me feel good, I was like, I like that. That is so different. And I thought, like, you know what? I remember when I was a little kid and my mom would do that. And I thought that was so calming and soothing. It was like a moment that we would share together. And I thought, like, oh, that is kind of a nice kind of thing to think about. So, yeah, self-care can look different in so many ways.
Yeah, I love that. Greasing your big shout out to your client for greasing your scalp. Jump on that trend. I love it already. Another thing you had touched upon was, and I think this is part of self-care too, is the no's, right? A lot of us, as you said, are caretakers, especially if you're from certain communities where, I work with students where they're the primary English speaker in the house. They're the eldest child who's the only one who has a job. Everything is on them because they're in college, and everyone has expectations that they're the ones that have to bring home and save the family. They come home and watch the younger siblings cook the food. They have to be the best behaved, get the driver's license to go to the supermarket. They do so much. Although they also don't have the resources, right? So they're not rich. They're coming from low socioeconomic spaces. And then here we are asking them to do more. And it's so difficult, I think, for those people who are multitasking in such a multitude of ways, but also multitasking in like essential ways too. So it's not like multitasking like I'm a part of 4 clubs, which is something too. But like it's the multitasking, like I'm cooking, cleaning, taking care of the house, paying the light bill, going to class. And how do I say no to some of these things, or even some of the outside factors that come in? Because I think, like you said, that no is really important to your mental health and to your stability. So if I'm having trouble saying no, what would be some tips that you would provide for that?
I think in the example that you provided, I think that definitely can happen in terms of, larger families, immigrant families, generational families, and being able to say no. And sometimes, in terms of working on that, it's kind of problem solving and looking at who else can kind of help and take those responsibilities on if there's other siblings. So it's about trying to manage, right? Because sometimes what I do notice in terms of, particularly in, I would say like multi-generational families, immigrant families, that is a real issue. And it is about like, let's kind of look at this issue in terms of how can we navigate and manage this a little bit better, that all of these responsibilities are not yours, right? And also being able to, think about what you can say okay to and what you can say no to, because not everything is always important. And I think like when you get into that mind frame, you feel like there's no way to say no, but sometimes there is. And kind of like exploring and saying like, what are some things that have to be prioritized? What are some of those things that really are not that important, and maybe you can say no in these areas versus some of these things that are really a necessity? So kind of really examining that would be something we do in the session, kind of exploring those responsibilities and problem solving and prioritizing would be something I would recommend.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And what that brings up is the, I think, a next question of that I want to bring up. But before I actually say that, I just want to again let all of our viewers out there know that the comment section is available for questions, so that Dr. Nancy Adegoke, who's here with us, can answer. So please do not hesitate in sharing your questions in the comments, so that we can get them to Dr. Nancy. So, Nancy, the next question I have for you is, and so for me, community, I think, is
Mm,
whenever I think of mental health, self
mhm,
care, whenever
mhm,
I thinking of, myself,
mhm,
trying to better myself, I can't think of that without thinking of the community around me.
mm,
And you mentioned this, that your tribe, the people that you can rely on, the people that are going
mhm,
to pick you up when you're at your
mhm,
lowest, that are
mhm,
outside of just maybe
mhm,
your therapist, but like your
mhm,
community. Can you
mhm,
like talk a little bit about why that's important? Like, why is community, or do you think it is? I mean, why is community so important to helping us
mhm,
get to that space of,
mhm.
of great mental health and self care?
Yeah, I think, when we think about communities of color, community is definitely of importance in terms of, you know, communities of color are more collectivistic versus individualistic. So that is sort of incorporated in terms of one of those values that we have that has been, over time. So think about that in terms of, historically, in terms of slavery, people coming from various different countries in Africa being placed into one country and not speaking languages, but having to connect and feel we need to build a community. So historically, that has been sort of emphasized within our community, and we still kind of continue to value community, right? So it is so important for those individuals who have that important sense of community to find that space. I think community is so important. And so for me, in terms of thinking about counseling and looking at clients, I do ask about community because it might not be valued for everyone, but I would say it's an important value for most people of color. So finding your tribe and finding a space of people who, one, want to see you succeed, want to see you be well, want to see you advance, right? So I do look at community as being important. And community comes in so many ways. It can be, your circle of friends, it could be your church community, it can be so many different circles of community that help us to just feel stronger and sometimes navigate the world that we live in and sometimes build us up and support us. So I do kind of look at community in terms of how your community can be important in terms of bringing you up, lifting you up. And so it's something that I emphasize in terms of also in, like I said, recommendation in terms of even self-care. Sometimes self-care might be like well, people don't pick up texting texting a friend and kind of or doing a FaceTime in terms of, I want to see how you're doing, and checking up on friends and them checking up on you. So really important to have those connections because they are also important in terms of our well-being. And let me just say this, given the pandemic, people have felt very lonely and isolated. So important to make those connections so you don't feel alone. I think things are changing right now, gratefully. We're kind of moving in the right direction, but still, the past 2 years, people did feel very isolated and not connected. So community is important in terms of having those connections because loneliness can actually, of course, lead to more depression and anxiety. So we want to feel connected to others.
Yeah, that's, man, that's really really interesting. Um, and I think it's like it's brilliant too to think about it, right? But it really opens the door um to this question about, so the pandemic I think was important because it changed the world, right? Now, you're right. I think a lot of people got lonely. They were alone in the rooms and in their spaces, and then they found refuge onto social media, right? So social media already, and you talked about it a little bit. Social media already was a major contributor to, I think, our anxiety, our stress, our attention. The pandemic hits. you're alone. Your new community is kind of these people in these boxes and these spaces. And but then that's not always the healthiest, because I think, anything that doesn't turn off ever, I'm always like weird. I'm like, man, this thing never turns off, and it never does.
Mm,
So
mm,
can you, like, I'm just interested in your thoughts a little bit about social media, and like, how do we combat something that is literally everywhere?
right. Well, you know what? I think we have the power to turn it off, right? And let me just say this: I think social media
Some of us do. I don't know
can
if I
be
yeah, I'm trying.
so that would be something to work on, right? To be
Yeah.
able to kind of shut it off, shut down at some times, because social media can be instrumental at times too, right? Provides us information. It does provide a sense of connection. And I want to say there are some beneficial sort of implications to social media, right? Social media can be helpful, but I do think there's limits, right? And that's the reason why I also kind of say to people, you know what? How do you unplug? How do you wind down? How do you kind of cut that time off in terms of social media, because it is just constant, right? And it is so important that in terms of just winding down, our brain needs to wind down, right? And so it's so important to kind of realize like that sort of interface between technology and actually the human brain is excited actually by the technology going on. So we actually do need to kind of shut down and like unplug. So oftentimes I tell people, you know what, it's so important to kind of unplug like an hour before you go to bed, just to
Yeah.
let your brain wind down, because actually, that interface between social media or being on your computer or any technological devices actually excites the brain. So you actually need to kind of take time to unplug, because it's helpful in terms of just winding down and allowing your brain to rest. And we all need that rest.
Yeah, we certainly do. And yeah, it's just it's y- it's tough, right? Because I think in those spaces again, you feel like you have to be on, and it's like the fear of missing out, like FOMO, or like when you were a kid and your parents
Mhm.
were having conversations after 10 o'clock in the living room, and you're in the bedroom supposed to be asleep, and you're just like, man, why don't they just let me back outside there for another 10 minutes? And I think sometimes that's what social media feels like. So I think you're right. I love the idea of just making the decision, right? Of saying an hour before I go to bed. And I love what you talked about, the increments. It's like, all right, I can't do an hour right now, but I can do 20 minutes before I go to bed, or 10 minutes before I go to bed, and then work my way up into that space.
Mhm.
I think that's really helpful as well. Um, so Nancy, I think we're getting close towards the end of our conversation, and
Mhm.
I just wanted to. My last thing that I really wanted to let you know, or ask from you is, kind of like what's next, right? It's like
Mhm.
what happens now. We've been provided more information than ever, right? So there's conversations like this happening all across the country now,
Mhm.
especially in the Black communities. We're starting to break through some of those stigmas that we talked about earlier, where you see it. Celebrities like Charlemagne the God are talking about
Mhm. Mhm.
mental health, and
Mhm.
we're pushing through some boundaries here.
Mhm. Mhm.
If I had to ask you, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit about, what do you think happens next? Do you think we'll ever get to a space where we are all 110% comfortable expressing ourselves, or what do you think happens in the conversation about Black mental health? Are we having this conversation that we're having, you and I, 10 years from now,
Mhm.
to try and
Mhm.
address some of these issues?
Mhm. I think it's changing generationally. I think that the younger generation, so the current generation of young people, are more open and verbal about mental health. So that's a great thing. And I see that like even on TikTok, people are just like talking about mental health in terms of even providing information. So that's really important, that people can share their stories about mental health. And that really does reduce some of the stigma that people have with regards to having depression or suffering from anxiety, right? To be able to see someone that looks like you who's able to talk about it and say or acknowledge, like, you know what, I do have this issue and I'm trying to work through it and I'm seeking help. So we are kind of moving along where, and I talked about some of those celebrities in terms of we are having conversation where there's more of an openness to talk about mental health. So that's a great thing that's happening. I would also say this too. I think, what I'm also seeing, because I also work with another organization, transformational health. And so I'm also seeing church communities also opening their doors to having conversations about mental health. So oftentimes, mental health was seen within, there was some obstacles and barriers within the church community with regards to mental health, and people felt that spirituality was a way to kind of combat mental health issues. So speak to your minister, pray about it. So I think the fact that we're seeing more of a collaboration, with the church community in supporting mental health is sort of, again, moving in the right direction within the Black community of embracing and accepting mental health and seeking help. And so that is going in the right direction. So I do see things moving forward. So that's a great thing. And like I said, I think what this pandemic has done is also brought mental health issues to the forefront where people are actually seeking help. So it's unfortunate we had this situation, but it's interesting for me as a mental health professional to see more people seeking help. And that's what I've been experiencing, just people reaching out saying, like, how can I find services, or how can I connect with you, or do you know anyone else who I can connect with who can provide service within this area? So it is happening. So I think we are moving in the right direction.
And that was great. I'm going to open the door one last time for our audience. If anybody has any questions, this is the time to ask in the comment section on Facebook Live or YouTube. Please let us know. And, I just want to also let everyone know that, for those of you that are at Queens College, that there are services available. That please do not hesitate in reaching out to your different resources on campus. As Dr. Nancy had mentioned, there are people on campus there to support you, so don't hesitate in making that outreach, and finding somebody that you can speak to, that you can call. So that's something that's important. uh
Absolutely. And just let me just add, Jeff, to that is that if you don't want to have services at your campus, the providers or the clinicians at your school will also help you in terms of finding external providers, so people outside of the school. So that's something that is also offered. So the school can be sort of the base of connection for services, whether it's in-house on your campus or whether it is services that are external.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the most important thing, I think, is at any time that you are feeling in need of anything, don't hesitate in reaching out. Even if at first it's about starting out and reaching out to a friend or a loved one, and then eventually getting yourself to a mental health professional. This is the time that I think we have with one another. And the thing that I love not only about Black History Month, but just about these conversations, is that I think it encourages more community. It encourages more conversations amongst our family, friends, and loved ones, and even strangers and allies, and on all of the above. So let's continue to have these conversations. Dr. Nancy, I'm going to your email is Dr. Nancy Adegoke at gmail.com, correct?
That is correct.
All right. So if anybody has any further questions, wants to outreach to Nancy, again, Dr. Nancy Adegoke at gmail.com. Do not hesitate in reaching out. And if you want more information, you can always reach out to us at Trill or Not Trill on all social media platforms at Trill or Not Trill. So please email Dr. Nancy Adegoke or hit us up on social media at Trill or Not Trill. Queens College, I want to say thank you for hosting us tonight. This was such a powerful conversation. And Dr. Nancy Adegoke, it's literally always a pleasure speaking to you. We've been having these conversations for years, and I look forward to having more with you. It's such a pleasure and an honor, and continued success and forward progress as you move on.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Jeff. And thank you again for inviting me. It was a pleasure in terms of having this conversation. And I hope through this conversation, I'm encouraging people because this is something that I really strongly believe in, because this is the profession that I pursued, is that if you need help, please seek it. And there is help available. So um, one of the things that I do in terms of being a Black professional in mental health is just making sure that people get the help that they need and it is available. So no shame in terms of seeking help. It is actually a strength. And I say that to all my clients who make it through the door. I'm like, it is a strength that you made it here, because I know that it's not easy to kind of come in through that front door and say that I need help. So again, if anyone is in need of services or help, definitely I can provide resources and provide help in that way. And again, thank you for your time and inviting me to the college.
Yeah, Nancy, before you go, somebody did ask one more question. Where are you based out of?
I am based actually in Rockville Center in Long Island.
Rockville Center in Long Island.
Well, let me just say this. So this is the other thing I can add to the conversation. What has been so interesting in terms of the pandemic is that it has offered us so many different ways to be able to see clients. So I do telehealth services. So I am seeing clients who are not from Long Island. They are from all over, actually, within New York City and outside of the city. So just to be aware. So that is another platform which has been really helpful in allowing for access. So we were talking about access. So telehealth services allows for access, particularly given the pandemic. And if anyone feels uncomfortable being seen in person, it just allows for a level of connection and help in a different way that we never thought of before.
Love it. I love it. Nancy, thank you so much once again. Queens College, thank you again. This has been a tremendous month of programming here for Black History Month at Queens College. And we're going to continue hopefully in March and have some more amazing virtual programming for Women's History Month. And let's just continue to do the work together. Again, I go by the name of Jeff Dess on behalf of Trill or Not Trill, on behalf of Dr. Nancy Adegoke and the amazing Queens College student life staff. We want to say thank you. Have a great rest of the day, evening, afternoon, wherever you're watching this. We appreciate you. Peace.
Good night.